Hello there, Ray here. If you haven't already seen my snapshot review video, in the latest 1.17 version, we had a big change come to Minecraft. They increased the world height by 50%. This means caves are twice as deep now, going all the way down to -64 Y level. In this video, we're going to be answering all your dire questions to do with how the new caves will be affecting your spawn rates inside of your farms and what exactly it looks like when you update an old world into the new worlds with the deep caves. So first off, let's do a simple test. I'm over here at my simple witch farm. This is my design with the zoglins that kill the witches. It only takes about 30 minutes to build this entire thing up in survival, and in 1.16 versions it produces over 3,100 items per hour. And it doesn't need any blocks cleared away or any blocks dug or any of the caves lit up. So this is a more typical type of farm that players would build up in their world. They would just build it here on the level where the witch hut spawns, meaning that there's typically 64 blocks underneath of the farm that the game has to try to see if mobs are going to spawn here before eventually it gets up to the witch hut and places them inside of there. Now that all changed with the 1.17, there is now twice as many blocks underneath, so there's 128 blocks that the game has to go through before it attempts to spawn in any mobs inside of the witch hut. Because of this, we can expect the rates to be decreased by quite a bit. So previously, this witch farm would produce around 3,200 items per hour, but now it's almost half that, around 1,700. This is just because there is double the amount of blocks between the bottom of the world and where the witch huts are now. It's not that the witch huts are placed any higher, they just lower the world down into the negatives. And even though the player, when he runs this farm, he AFKs way up in the air so that none of the mobs spawn down in the caves, the game still has to go through all those blocks underneath and check before it applies any mobs inside of the witch hut. But what happens if you have an old witch hut with the old world generation, meaning that it is only 64 blocks thick? What will happen when you update your world? Well, the thing is, when you update like I did here, you can actually build underneath, and you can actually build all the way down to -64. And because this is all area where blocks could be at, the game still checks all the way down here and you'll get slow mob spawns. So it doesn't matter what type of generation you have, the old or the new, the mob spawning will apply the same to both of them. But updating an old world to a new world does cause some really weird stuff. As you can see, right here is where the old world used to end with the bedrock, and now the new world with the new generation doubles the caves. You can see it goes way down here, which causes it to look really weird. You end up with this huge void area where you could easily build deep underground without having any blocks to remove. This also means that you could be over here inside of this new generation and you could be mining your way through and just end up falling off the edge and into the void because there's nothing down here to stop you from falling into the void. And it's unlikely that they will add in some kind of weird bedrock wall here to prevent players from accidentally falling in. Because typically the rule is they don't want to touch old chunks because people have builds in there and different stuff's going on. So they normally just leave those as they are and only concentrate on the new generation. This also means you got all this bedrock here, which a player can now access from underneath. You could build in a wither cage very easily in the overworld by putting the wither underneath here and having his side heads and his main head up inside of here. And then you could build a farm that pushes blocks into him and he destroys them. I have an entire playlist going over stable wither cages if you're curious how those work. This would be a great place to have a base like way out underneath of the bedrock. You don't even need to break bedrock. You just come in from a side like this and then you fly with your elytra way out to your base. And I guess you could even have a nether portal down here, or it could glitch through the bedrock to access the top of it. Speaking of nether portals, what happens when you go through at this Y level, which is in the negatives? Looks like it just throws you up to the nearest area in the nether, as this area is all full of blocks. And then let's go back and see if we can find the same nether portal. Yep, it looks like it works. Now another question I've seen you guys ask is, will the nether and the end dimension get these same changes that we've seen in the overworld, where their world limit gets extended, making them deeper as well as much higher? Now I definitely think they will eventually do this to both the nether and the end dimension, but I think they're going to save it for special updates in each of them. Now here with the nether, we do have bedrock on both ends, the bottom and the top. The bottom bedrock just prevents you from falling in the void, but the top bedrock actually doesn't really have anything that's stopping you from going, since only half of the nether is being currently used. And back in the day, entire Minecraft was actually all this height, 128, and it was only later on did they increase it to 256, and now we got increased to 320. And when they actually did add this change, it was a pretty big deal, I remember it. So this isn't the first time that Minecraft has increased the world height limit. So they did increase the nether. I think what they would do is probably come up with some like unique stuff to put down low or up high, because they also changed it so that now biomes can change vertically. So you can actually go up and reach a different biome rather than moving horizontally. And because of this, they could actually make it so that if you went higher than 128, then there'd be a new biome up here, or if you went lower than Y level 0, there'd be some like special, extremely dangerous or hard to traverse biome generation down there. Now this same thing could apply to the end dimension. In a future update, they can make it go down lower and add in some new small little islands down there. And they can also expand it up high, maybe make kind of like a sky biome up in the air above the end dimension. And one thing Mojang did say is that when it comes to adding in new dimensions, they first want to flesh out the current 3 dimensions before adding any new ones. You guys also asked about what do you think 1.18 will be about, and I think 1.18 will be a smaller update that concentrates maybe on the accessibilities of Minecraft. I definitely think it'd be cool for the end dimension to have special new types of blocks that are at the lower pieces of these islands, because these islands are solid endstone and there's nothing unique about the bottom or the top. For like the overworld, we have like grass at the top and dirt, and then we have like stone, and then there's like lava and bedrock at the bottom. Another reason why I think that 1.18 is going to be a smaller update is because they try to aim for about 2 updates per year, and with 1.17 going to take up the majority of 2021, 1.18 most likely will be quite a bit smaller. Now double the area where they can place an ores, there is a lot more ores per chunk. But they did say that the actual types and how they're distributed will change on the full release of 1.17. As this is a snapshot and they will be tweaking it as they see fit. So maybe with the spawn rates being low, they'll increase them, because now there is a lot more caves that the mobs could end up being inside of. Therefore, it's less likely for you to run into a mob, because the 70 hostile mobs that typically spawn around a player are going to be scattered all throughout these areas. This also means that if you're trying to actually light up a cave to prevent them from spawning, you're going to have your hands full. Currently, we really only have 2 types of caves added, but they're going to add in a bunch of more different types. And I think it's going to get to the point where lighting up a cave probably won't even be something people will do anymore in the future. Besides lighting them up, also slimes can spawn where there are slime chunks, and that means you'd have to place down water or button them or put slabs down to stop those from coming in. And if you're going to actually mine out all these blocks, you have to dig twice as many of them to get to the bottom of the world. Or if you're going to use a perimeter maker, it's going to take twice as long to clear them all out. And that gets into our next question. Is it worth it coming in and removing all these blocks so that you can build your farm down lower? Because in previous versions, the lower your farm was, the better the rates were. Now, is that still true with the 1.17 new deep generation? And what are the rates if you would happen to place a farm way down here? And that is where this test come in, where I'm testing on 4 different Minecraft accounts. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we got going on here. This is my super simple spider farm that I designed like 7 years ago or something, and it still works, which is pretty insane. Uses water to flush them out and they just fall down and hover minecarts pick up the loot. I have one for general mobs as well. I should probably update these farms, so look forward to that video. And we got this farm set up in the typical area. So we got it right above a ocean, and the player would just AFK above it so that no hostile mobs can spawn anywhere in the caves below the ocean, but will end up only spawning inside of the farm. So I ran this farm here in 1.16, and the rates of this was over 7,000 string per hour. I didn't have to do any lighting up of caves or any removing of blocks or making any deep perimeter, just taking advantage of the natural terrain. And all this glass here, which doesn't render very well, is just to illustrate the area where the game tries to place in mobs around the player. And you can see the very bottom of the circle is all within the ocean. So the player would AFK down any lower, it's possible that mobs would spawn in some of these caves down here. So the AFK point is important. So next up, I took this same spider farm and I just placed it way down on the bottom of the world. So this is Y level 0. And surprisingly, it does pretty well down here, even though it doesn't have a insane amount of spawning spaces. It gets really close to staying near the cap of 70 hostile mobs. So let's go ahead and take a look at the rates of this farm. In 1 hour, this farm produced around 12,500 items per hour. So not quite double from the one that was at the ocean level. But this one you had to do a lot more work. You have to remove all the blocks above it so that the game recognizes it as being way down low. And you would also have to light up and spawn proof all the other blocks around here or remove them like I did in this situation. And that way all of them are focused inside of your mob farm over here. So now let's compare this to 1.17 snapshot. Here I got one that has the exact same spider farm, but it's on the surface of the water. Except this one has 128 blocks worth of caves underneath. So let's see, how does that affect the farm? This one produces an average of 4,500 items per hour. So it produced about only 2/3 of what it did in 1.16. We lost about 1/3 of the rates. Now let's check out this one, which is the exact same farm and also in 1.17. But I put this down underneath of the old terrain and we're actually way down at -64. So similar to the 1.16 one, except we're at the lowest part of the new generation. And the rates of this farm is around 11,700 items per hour, which is actually pretty close to what we've seen in 1.16. So it is possible to get similar rates as before. You just have to go down much farther, meaning you have to remove more blocks above it or light up more caves and spawn proof more just to get about the same amount of rate. Now this could all change because we are still in a snapshot, but if they did increase the spawn rates, we can still get similar rates as before. Now if they would increase the spawn rates just because there's more caves, then that means the farms down at the new lowest part of the world will actually be faster than what we've seen in 1.16. But to get the best rates, you don't actually have to remove all the blocks in this entire area. That's kind of a misconception, is people think that perimeters have to have all the blocks removed in order to get the best rate. And that's just not true. Most of the time, big holes are made in the game just for fun and to make it look cool, as blocks just sitting there don't affect the rates, only if mobs are spawning on them. So if you do have any farms that are on top of the old bedrock, it will be slower, and if you want to get the best rates, you'll have to find a new area and dig down, place them at the very bottom of the world, or you're going to have to break all the bedrock there and then rebuild them down lower. Because you have to either remove bedrock plus remove old terrain or remove twice as much new terrain, it's very possible people will stop making full-size perimeters other than just for looks. Now I kind of anticipated them lowering down the bedrock as well as raising the world limit because there was a lot of signs that they were actually going to lower the world. And this is why I spent a lot of time prepping areas for future farms rather than making the actual farms. Now, one question I've seen you guys ask was, do slime chunks now go down lower? And they seem to go all the way down to -64. I mean that if you do clear out one of these chunks, you can make them at the very bottom of the world to get the same spawn rates as you did before. Now there has been a typical trend throughout the years where mob spawning rates have been decreasing. Now besides having to worry about your farms getting a lot slower, also you need to worry about the amount of lag that occurs when placing in blocks. Now that there is 328 vertical blocks per chunk, any block that you place at the very top of the world has to have its light checked all the way down to the very bottom. And this causes quite a bit of lag. And we can actually see this. I'm just pushing this block over into this chunk over here, and notice every time the block crosses the border, it creates a huge lag spike. And you can see that in the bottom left. And then as soon as I stop, it goes back to normal speed. Now with all this extra height above your Minecraft worlds, you can expand on extremely large builds. Like a good friend of mine, Drathmore, is building this epic sky ornament, and he currently reached the very top of the world with the old generation, but with a new one he should be able to expand it and go even farther up. So besides making your builds higher, Minecraft can also make generation like mountains go up much higher. And of course, people can do fun stuff like powder snow and even the vines. But when you fall, you also do reach a maximum speed, so doing MLG doesn't really get any harder. With more height above the biomes, it means that you can even have your base above tall hills and prevent mobs from spawning on the peaks of them. So biomes like savanna mountains, which normally almost go up to the very top of the build limit, can now have structures built on top of them that go much higher. Now, depending if they change the spawn rates of mobs, caves might actually be safer because mobs are spread out and you're unlikely to find a whole bunch in one area. But then again, they could change it so that caving is more dangerous. But then there is always the mushroom islands where no hostile mobs will spawn in these biomes. So if you're caving underneath of them, you won't have to worry about getting attacked. We did a lot of looking at the caves in the new generation during our Twitch stream. We'll have another one this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But one thing we looked at was the super flat worlds, and they did get them moved all the way down to the bottom of the world, which is now -64. We also took a look at amplified worlds to see if the cave generation would move up into these large mountains. And it didn't really seem like they actually did. It looks like all this caves are the old generation. The new generation are these ones like this one. But one thing that did happen in the amplified is that the mountains are now much higher. So this big huge one here, this is at Y level 320, and that is actually at the very top of the new world limit. So amplified world already takes advantage of the extremely high build limit. Want to have some fun? Just open up a new amplified world. Man, this would be insane to try to take this on as a survival challenge. Some people's computers might not handle all this, especially when I move into like new generation. You can see it does load up kind of slowly, but everything looks just so much more crazier. It's so insanely tall. Like even this piece here is higher than the old world limit. And this is just in a desert. We found some really massive caves. Look at this one here. It has tons of like air. I mean, you could fly through here with your elytra. And it has the new aquifers, and it seems like right now the way they are kind of being separated is by putting in these false walls. So you can see this water level is different than this one, and this wall is keeping them separated. And that'll probably change in the future because currently it looks kind of strange with these individual like little ponds at different Y levels. Here is a massive stalagmite. See how insanely large this thing is. And this is how all the caves are going to be when Minecraft 1.17 comes out. There's going to be some really big ones and open. There's also going to be some really tiny ones. Now we also checked out, see how the cave generation would affect these infinite worlds. These are worlds that have the repeating cave generation every so many chunks. So you can see as I go this way, the cave on the right hand side, all this look exactly the same. And they're just a repetition of that. Now this is still using the old cave generation. All the new cave generation doesn't seem to be affected by this, but it does look extremely strange. While looking at the repetitive cave generation, we also found this Helix, which is two caves that go infinite distance in the same shape as like a DNA. It seemed like the geode generation was a little bit higher than normal too in these worlds. You can see there's quite a few of them just in this one screenshot. Another thing we looked at was the dripstone biome, which is a special biome that hasn't been introduced into the main game, but can be found in custom biomes. We combined that with the new cave generation, and look how insane this all looks. It's crazy. You got the water caves with the aquifers, and then the stalagmites and the stalactites at the little ones, and there's also these really big ones. You can kind of see what the caves will look like in the future. Now, this is just one biome type, but there's going to be a lot more. Plus, there's going to be more cave types. So there's going to be a mixture of different biomes mixed with different cave types. The biomes are going to choose what type of kind of foliage ends up inside of the cave, where the cave type will determine the actual shape of the cave. One thing that I did notice with these really big worlds now, when you go ahead to leave the world, it takes a while for it to save, a lot more than 1.16. And in general, ever since like 1.13, Minecraft is taking a lot longer to load. So I wonder if this will be improved upon, and a lot of people are concerned about performance, especially on servers. And Mojang is looking for ideas on what you think should all be added to the cave update. Like, what do you think should go way down low in Minecraft world, and maybe potentially some things that could happen way up high. Now, some cool things I thought they could add for the extra deepness that we have is, since we have this kind of separation between positive and negative, maybe in the negative area, there could be a lot more dangerous things that the player has to be aware of. Like maybe there could be gas pockets down here that would damage a player unless they had oxygen. Or maybe it's super dark where you actually need to have like a headlamp in order to just see through the fogginess. Now, the same type of damaging system could apply for the very top reaches of the world, as we now have 64 more blocks above the normal world. So if you get like this high, maybe there's like freezing damage because you're upward, starts to get really cold. Strongholds were also down as low as the bottom of the world, which means for speedrunning you'd have to dig through twice as many blocks in order to get to the entrance end portal. Rune portals normally generate and can oftentimes be completely hidden underground, not connected to any caves, but now that there's so many caves, it's a lot more likely to actually find these underground ones. We also found some areas where the icebergs were coming down into the cave generation. You can see this iceberg going through into the cavern down below. Now we also looked for different structures, and it seemed that all of them can generate down low. In the very narrow caverns, the mine shafts would have tons of these support beams which go down to the bottom of the cave floor. And if there was a big distance between the mine shaft and the bottom, they would make these very tall structures. We also found some really amazing looking caves. A lot of them were these big open areas with these pillars that were supporting them. There's also massive aquifers that stretched enormous distances. In these caves, you can find magma blocks generated part of the floor, which kind of brings out a little bit more life to the cave. But we did have a problem with players going into this kind of ghost mode, even when in survival, where you couldn't take any damage. So here you can see I don't have any oxygen bubbles and I'm not taking any damage. And we also ended up making some ghost air blocks, but they didn't really help at all. Because the caves are so full of water, it's good to bring some doors along with you so you can replenish your air. You can use other blocks, but these seem to be the best. With so much more surface area, you should be able to find a lot more ores more easily. But I definitely think having night vision is going to be a must for doing massive caving ventures. Because there's just some parts of the caves you wouldn't be able to see. We also test to see what is a new low point in the world until you take damage. And it's at negative 128, which is 64 blocks lower than the bottom of the new world. We also messed around with the new mechanic with this snapshot, which is powering the top of the drip leaf will prevent it from tipping any entities on top of it. So if I put a villager there, you see that it won't fall. And we hooked up to a little circuit here, and this will automatically drop any entity that's on top of it. You can make like mobs fall down, take fall damage, and then after a short period, they would drop them into a water stream, which would take them over to the player so you can kill them. Now this is pretty cool, but in the past I came up with what I consider better systems where you line the mobs up and drop them into a little tube like this, and then you can count how many there is inside of this area, and then only then do you remove this block to drop them down. Now the advantage over this compared to that is that you can actually count out the mobs. You don't have to worry about max cramming occurring. And this system already has a flaw, which is when it drops that mob, another mob could come through at the exact same time, and they could end up dropping not only the mob that took the fall damage, but also a mob that was falling at the same time. He could slip right through and take no fall damage and end up in the water. Now there is a way that they could implement it so that mobs are unlikely to fall all the way through when it tilts, and this is just by using these two hitboxes that are already in the game. So when the mob is on it, it should be like this, but then when it wants to drop it, all it does is it switches to this collision box right here. This will cause the mob to fall down slightly lower, and then when it goes back to being big, the mob will clip through the block since it changed the collision, and it will fall through it. And there's no point during that period where the actual collision is entirely missing like there is here. Now there could be a mob that is right between these two heights as it's falling, and then it switches back to this one, it clips right through, but it's unlikely for that to occur. A typical way that we solve this problem is by first having a mob drop down one level, and then have another platform which makes them drop down to the next level. And that way there is no point where both of these are opened up at the same time, and the mob can fall straight through both of them without taking damage from one of these. Now the limiting factor with the big drip leaf is that you can't even place them on top of each other like you can trapdoors, because they need to be on a solid surfaced block. The best thing you can do is waterlog that to move the mobs over, but you can't stack these on top of each other. You could do like a trapdoor on top of this, and then into a drip leaf. One of you guys also mentioned in the comments that the drip leaf on the player's head looks very much like the leaves that are on top of the villagers that come from the swamp. What I did is I took this big drip leaf and I used a command to place it onto this villager as a hat. This is what it looks like, and it does look very similar to these guys'. The back of theirs looks kind of like the front of this one. One part that I miss about the uniqueness of the moss block is that it prevents water sources from combining together to make another source. So I place one here, this is the source, and I place one here, this is the source. So these two sources would typically make an infinite source in the center here, but the uniqueness of the moss block prevents this from happening. Here's another example, put water there, and right here in the corners, still no water sources. This is great for making these unique type of flowing water. Like if I put an item here, you can see it flows that direction, but items over in this one here get flown to the outside corners. So this is an easy way to split items two different directions. Very nice and new mechanic, and will be great for having more control over the way water flows without having to worry about infinite sources. Keeks told me in my last video that the moss block is also unique where rain can go right through it. Now this is typically useful in fish farms where if rain can access down onto your fish farm, then you can get a higher chance of getting bites from fish. Now some of you guys thought using the ability that the moss block will convert nearby stone that you could make an easy way to remove stone in an area. The problem is that it only does this to blocks that have air above them, so it's not going to do it to like the ones back in there, and it only does it to the ones at the same wide level, so it's not going to go like downwards. You can't use this to keep removing blocks downwards. So what you would have to do is come in and remove a block, place in your moss block, then bone mill it. Then you could remove all of these, and then you'd be going back to removing a block, placing it in, and bone milling it. And also the shape is kind of random. So sometimes you get a large shape, sometimes you get a small shape. But once you get the smallest shape, then every time afterwards you can get the small shape. So I wouldn't recommend it as a way to kind of tunnel downwards or tunnel to the side. Thanks everybody who hopped on and joined us in this testing. You can find the IP to my server on the Discord. I definitely think that the 1.17 Caves and Cliffs update is going to be on par with the 1.7 update, which was to do with the new biomes. I'd love to hear what you guys think about the changes, and if you have any ideas on how they could be improved upon. I would like to thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye!